Welcome. This is selling in Brooklyn, but it's selling in New York City, not restricted to Brooklyn. We're going to have a small intimate class so we're going to hold questions till the end, but you can always put them in the chat, which is here on the bottom. Farah's going to put some information there now so you know where the chat is. And you can just put your questions there, and if they're relevant to what we're speaking at the time, we'll jump right in. Otherwise, we'll come back to circle back to questions at the end. Some other housekeeping. We'll be sharing relevant links also in the chat during the presentation, so look for that. You'll be emailed a copy of this recording, which will be on YouTube afterwards. Go ahead and share that around with your partners, whoever else needs to be involved in your process, or any friends or family that needs to watch this. And you'll get a copy of our seller's guide. It is not a comprehensive manual, but we have put a lot of resources all in one place to help you get started. And you can contact us after this presentation to ask us any questions that you don't want to ask publicly. We have a blog series that has tons of resources on it as well. So if you have any questions that you can't find in the seller's guide, you could probably put in a keyword and it'll pop up. And we also feature a women-owned blog series. So if you have anybody in your life that owns a business that is a women-owned business here in New York City, we love to feature women-owned businesses, have them get in touch with us, and we can feature them on our blog. It's a really great platform to give them publicity because we have excellent SEO, because I have had this blog for almost the whole time I've had the company, and I'll get into that right now. Hi, I'm Victoria Alexander. I'm the owner of Realty Collective, a boutique real estate firm that I started 18 years ago to defy the stereotypes associated with real estate brokers, and we know there are many. And my job is basically your coach, your therapist, your sounding board, helping you through the emotional roller coaster that is New York, selling in New York City, and trying to make this the least stressful process that it can be, even though we know it is stressful. So I'm going to now take the opportunity to introduce my co-host, Rashidah Siddiqui.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Rashidah Siddiqui. I am a real estate attorney. I have been practicing for 20 years now, represent many sellers in all over the New York City area, also licensed in New Jersey. My office is located downtown Brooklyn, but as I said, I represent clients both in Brooklyn, the city, Westchester, Long Island, Staten Island, all of the in Suffolk County as well. So I look forward to giving you information on what the attorney's role in selling the property. Because in New York, you must have an attorney to sell a property, to prepare the documents, certain documents, which we'll go over. And then also, as you prepare to put your property on the market, potentially things that you should keep so that it makes the process a lot more easier going forward.
So why sell now? First slide. Second slide, maybe. Yeah, next one. You might be wanting to trading up to a bigger space. Your property is high demand in the market that we're in right now, which might be having lots of space out close to the park, having outdoor space, or you're ready to leave New York City, which we would be sad to help with, but we understand sometimes transitions and new phases needs to happen. So, but right now the market is very hot for certain kinds of properties, but it's an interesting time to sell because of the high interest rates, which we have not been seeing for a very long time, and the extremely low interest rates that we saw last year, and the extremely high rents that are also in the market. But a spring market that we're in right now, we have a lot less buyers than we do usually, but we also have less inventory. So that is keeping demand high and prices high on property. So things to consider when thinking about selling. Next slide. The market has been in a current state of flux over the past year. There continues to be low inventory. Interest rates for buyers have gone up, but rents have also soared, driving some renters back into the buyer's market because they left in the fall. There's really a very dry time at the end of 2022. And so if you have a property that can be priced correctly and positioned well, it is a good time to sell, so it can be good as of time to sell as last year. And so then taking all that into consideration, I like to talk to people about what is your break-even horizon. Most sellers, I say, need to have held their property for at least 5 years, and depends on, what their mortgage situation is, and if they paid cash. And if you're trading up to factor in the interest rate, there's a big difference if you're going to be going from paying 3% to 8% or 7%, and factoring that in as well. And it might make more sense to hold on to your property and rent it out. And now it might sound like I'm talking out of selling, but my job is really to figure out the best strategy for you and not just encourage you to sell, which is in my best interest, but what is in your best interest. So you need to understand the opportunity cost for buying and selling, because they're both really high on both ends. And I'm going to pass it over to Rashidah to talk about the closing costs and and other considerations to think about when you're thinking about selling that are listed here.
So with the closing costs, as one of the things that you always, for New York City, it's one where you have both New York City and New York State transfer taxes. New York City, your transfer tax is 1.425% if it's over 500,000, and it's 1% if it's under 500,000. So you always want to take that into consideration. Another thing for New York State is that it's 0.4% for New York State. So regardless, I tell clients, if you're buying or selling, the city and the state has their hands in your to get their funds. So one of the major costs for selling is that New York City and New York State transfer taxes. If you're looking at a co-op, if you sell in a co-op, there's some co-ops have what we call as a flip tax. A flip tax can vary depending on your co-op. You should always reach out to your management company to find out if there's one for your building. Typically, it's either based on the number of shares you own in the co-op or a percentage. Some co-ops do it a percentage of the selling price. Some may do it a percentage of your profit. And as I said, some may do it based on the number of shares you own. So that's another aspect of your closing costs that you need to take into consideration. Other than that, your things that you're going to be paying off, if you have a mortgage on the property, you're paying off your mortgage, realtor commission, you have that as well. You don't pay this at closing, but it is a consideration that you need to think about is capital gains. If you've owned this property, you bought it in the 80s or the early 90s, and now you're selling it and it's, you bought it for 150,000 and now you're selling it for 700,000 or something like that, there's potentially capital gains that you're going to have to pay. Now you do have an exemption if it was your primary residence. I always tell clients, speak to your accountant is a thing that you need to take into consideration. But it is something, the capital gains is something that you may have to pay also, but you do have an exemption. It's $250,000 if it's one individual, $500,000 if it's a couple. And once again, it had to have been your primary residence for 2 out of the last 5 years. Miscellaneous fees, depending on if it's a co-op or a condo, they may have move-out fees. Some condominiums have option fees, which are similar to flip tax. But once again, it's something that you definitely want to have a conversation with your management company to find out what fees your particular building may have. So those are one of the, when you're thinking about closing costs, what you think about as a seller. If it's investment property, then we call a 1031 exchange. This can be another hour kind of conversation on what a 1031 exchange is and the implications there. But just a quick summary is that you're selling investment property and you're buying investment property and you're trying to defer that potential capital gains that the federal government wants to collect when you sell the property. So there are those type of considerations. If it's a property that you use both as your primary residence and you also used it as investment, maybe you started renting it out, or it's a 2-family and you live in one unit and you rent out the other unit, you also should speak about if you can do a 1031 exchange for the investment portion, and use the exemption as your primary for your primary residence portion. So there's different ways to try to minimize what your long-term taxes are, but at closing, taxes that you cannot get away from are your transfer taxes, New York City, New York State. And if you're the co-op, you have the flip tax if your particular building has that.
Great. So now that we have talked about all of the different financing considerations that you need to take into account, next slide we'll be talking about, is your property what people are looking for? So that entails, do you have desirable amenities like washer, dryer, and unit, dishwasher, close to a park, close to a subway? Do you have outdoor space? Are you in a building with lots of amenities like a gym, or are you in a bigger house, 1 to 4 family or single family with a lot of square footage? People want space. Is your property turnkey? A lot of buyers right now in this market are very concerned about doing work. The cost of doing work has gone up, the cost of contractors has gone up, and the timelines, we all are still hearing about some supply chain issues. The cost of wood has fluctuated so much in the last 2 years. So people really have been leaning towards properties that are turnkey and ready to go. That doesn't mean if you have something that needs a little bit of work, won't sell. It just means there has to probably be a little bit of a bigger discount than to compete with the properties that are on the market now, because there is a large amount of new development inventory that you will be competing with if you're in the condo or co-op market. Unless you have a fixer that is priced well and doesn't need substantial work because of the cost of construction and inflation. Also, I forgot the inflation part. Oh, my hair disappeared again. There is a buyer for just about every property out there, and positioning your property to find the right buyer is the important part. Remember, you only need one buyer. So, taking those things into consideration, the biggest and first conversation I like to have with my clients after we talk about their property is, do you have a plan after you sell? Timeline and flexibility. Where are you going? Know that if you sell for this amount, you will have enough to start the next stage of your life and will help you decide on your true bottom line. What's your exit strategy? You need to know before you put the property on the market, because things move fast and you want them to move fast. So as soon as the property is on the market, we're going to be getting offers. And then we're going to be the contract. And then 3 months later, the property isn't yours anymore once the closing happens. So where are you going? And that is a really important conversation that I'd like to have on day one with people, because they need to know what their next steps are. Are you going to be buying another property? Do you need the funds from this property to transition into your next property? Are you going to move across the country? Are you moving across the country now? And I'm going to be getting your mail and cleaning the snow off your stoop or the leaves off your stairs. So understanding exactly what your exit strategy is and where you're going is a super important part of this process. And making sure what your goals are out of the scenario. Is there financial goals or a timeline goal? Is there a physical goal? Trying to make this, the reason we're involved is to, lots of reasons, but one of them is to manage this property so it's less stressful and help you reach your goals of selling this property. We want to position you into the life where you want to have it next after this transaction is over. This is a big part of the puzzle and how we position your home and create a sales strategy that is in line with your goals. Timing, it will take anywhere from 4 to 6 months in a perfect scenario to get to the closing table. So we want to work back into that to make sure that you are on the same timeline and have a rental, a next home, or a move set up after this. I've definitely had people have called me like 2 weeks before the closing and said, I don't have anywhere to go in the past, or I don't want to sell my home anymore, or other crazy things that they didn't think about, even though we've had these conversations 3 to 6 months ago. So moving on from after you've making a plan after you sell the property, and we haven't scared you off too much. So you've decided to sell. After you've answered all of these questions and come up with a strategy with your agent, it's time to start the selling process. So the first thing you're going to do is assemble your team. And the 2 people you need in New York City is an attorney and a real estate broker. The things that you need to make sure that they are things I have listed here. Make sure they're an expert, make sure they know the market, you know how to navigate a shifting market, and they understand, you know, your neighborhood and the assets of the sale. I always encourage people to call and interview people, know that they can rep your property in the right way. This is a job. You want to treat everybody like this is a job interview. You want to check that they're experts in their field and in the industry, and that they've been doing this a long time. Anybody that's, you know, fresh out of real estate school or fresh out of law school, you know, you want to make sure that they have the industry relationships and marketing experience to properly represent you. Other things to think about, and ask your agent, how available are they? What days are they off? Because you want to make sure that if they're off on Saturday and Sunday, who's doing the open houses on the weekend? Or if they're off on Thursday and Friday and you only take calls on Thursday and Friday, that your schedules line up. And do they have a team? Are they going to be handing you off to somebody on their team? Or are you going to be working directly with them? If you interview somebody and you hire them, you want to be working with them, not some random people that work under them. You're hiring the person at the top, and you want to make sure that they're showing up for you. And what's their marketing strategy? And you want to make sure you work with somebody that understands your neighborhood and is relatable to the buyers that are coming into the property. And that they're part of the MLS and understand your product and the buyer and is relatable to the buyer. If you want a personalized service, or if you want to be completely hands-off, are you going to be calling every other day trying to get updates? Or do you want to just say, call me when you need me? Like, I don't want to be bothered. This is why I'm hiring you. This is stressing me out. I have my own full-time job. So understanding how you want to participate in the process is important too. And communicating that to the other broker, because to the brokers you're interviewing, if it's not me. And the property needs to tell a consistent story. So, and not a problematic or troublesome one. So you want to make sure that you're fixing and addressing any issues ahead of time. And you want to talk to your attorney first to get any of those problems addressed, whether they're legal or paperwork or physical. I'm going to hand it off to Rashidah to talk about assembling your attorney and what questions to ask her when you call her after this.
Yeah, so definitely need an attorney when you're selling in New York. The reason you need an attorney, because there are certain documents that have to be prepared, and they can't be prepared. They only can be prepared by an attorney, such as your contract of sale, your transfer tax documents, if it's a house or a condo, the deed. If it's a co-op, there's additional co-op documents that have to be prepared with the co-op attorney. So for New York, as a seller, you definitely need an attorney that's licensed and does real estate. Also, because the buyer is given their down payment, and that down payment has to be held in an escrow account by your seller, by the seller's attorney. So that's why you also want to make sure that you're working with a reputable attorney that does practice in New York, has an escrow account, and knows the field of real estate. When you are looking to sell and you go to your attorney, a couple of things that the attorney may tell you to start gathering or putting aside, especially if you're going to be packing. A lot of it is maybe the documents from when you purchased your property. So if you have your original deed, do you have your original owner's policy? Do you have the survey of the property if it's a house? If it's a condo or a co-op, do you have the offering plan for the condominium, the house rules, the financials? If it's a co-op, do you have your stock and lease? Or if there's a mortgage on the property, does your lender have those items? If you don't have a mortgage, do you have the original items? So as you start thinking about putting the property on the market, you want to make sure that you have those documents or know where you can get those documents, because once you get into contract, you need to get them either to the potential buyer, or when it's time for closing, you're going to need them for the closing as well. And if there's documents that are missing, then it's always good to know ahead of the game, because then your attorney can determine what needs to be done to get the missing documents, if at all. So always good to get those documents. I always say for house, survey, owner's policy, copy of your deed, The deed, not so much an issue because your attorney can always pull it up and to just confirm who's the owner, legal owner of the property. If you refinance or if you took somebody off of the deed or added somebody onto the deed, you want to tell your attorney about that as well. Sometimes parents may have added a child or siblings, or you purchased it and somebody else was on it in order for you to qualify for the mortgage, and now they're off of the property or they're still on, even though they're not physically there living in the property. So these are things that you need to make sure that your attorney knows. If you did alterations, whether it's a co-op, a condo, or a house, did you put a deck? Did you redo turn it from a 1-bedroom to a 2-bedroom? So any alteration agreements, plans, you want to make sure that your contractors closed out any permits. I always say it's better to be preventative than reactive because these things come up when they're doing a search of the property, whether it's a co-op, a condo, or a house. They're looking for open permits. They're looking for violations. Your contract is going to state that if you've done any alterations, you've gotten the appropriate approvals from the condo association, the co-op association, or from the city if you did alterations to a house. So you want to make sure that you gather these documents in advance of just before, as you think of putting it on the property, the property on the market. So those are your attorney should be asking you, and you should also ask the attorney. Always ask the attorney, how long have they been practicing? Do they practice real estate? Do they do litigation? Are they family law? Because a lot of times, sometimes that's something that comes up. Your attorney should really be practicing real estate, knows how to prepare documents for the closing, knows about transfer documents, preparing deeds and things like that.
Yeah, I think the one thing I always tell buyers, and I think that I forget to tell sellers, is like, if your uncle, your brother is a lawyer, just because they're a lawyer and they're going to knock $500 off the fee or whatever, that doesn't mean you should hire them, because sometimes lawyers kill deals. One, they may not be practicing enough to know enough to not kill a deal and move it quickly, and sometimes can start negotiating for you, which is not their job. Their job is to protect you legally. Your real estate broker negotiates on your behalf and protects you. So there's a lot of reasons to make sure you're not hiring a friend or a family member just because they're giving you a discount. You want to hire somebody that is an expert and that you have vetted, and making sure that they're going to do a professional job. Rashidah was my lawyer. I always like to tell people, when I bought my house 11 years ago, Rashidah represented me in my purchase. And we've done probably over 100 deals since then. I can't even count. But how important it is to have somebody that you can communicate with you and that is a team player with your real estate broker, and you're creating the team so that you can all work quickly to facilitate the transaction in your best interest and reach those goals. So those are really important parts of that. The other thing is that if there's problems that you know about, this is an estate sale, there's somebody's name on the deed that passed away and you need to have resolve it. There's violations on the property. You have a difficult management company that makes the process longer. So the co-op application process, navigating these scenarios is what the lawyer and the real estate broker help with. And you can ask us to help you position your property correctly to overcome these challenges, as long as we know about them and we can get ahead of them to work to not make challenges in the process. So now that we've gone all over that, next slide, which is soliciting buyers. And the biggest part of soliciting buyers is telling a story, picking a broker that can tell that story, and staging. Biggest red flag, beware of virtual staging. Any broker that's going to not put the effort in and stage and style your home, big red flag, because the two realities never align for buyers. The property that they see on the internet and then the property that they come and see in real life never meet their expectations, and they always have a level of disappointment when they come to the property. And so is better to shoot the property empty. And so now that's why you'll see some properties, if you guys are looking to see what else is your competition out there on the internet, which I encourage you to do, they'll show pictures of the apartment empty and virtually staged, because they have learned that virtual staging really is a deterrent for people's perspective on reality. And it has hurt a lot of listings in the past, even though it seems like this great tech solution that we've found, it really hasn't benefited sellers in the long run. So we're going to work with sellers to prep the space and get the property ready for the market. And oftentimes, if you're in a situation where you can't front the cost for doing some things like painting and touch-ups, but these are things that really need to get done, us at Realty Collective, we will take on some of those costs ahead of time and get reimbursed at closing if you are not in the position to make those expenditures early on. We want to position your property in the best light possible. And if there's a couple small fixes that would do that and that we could get ahead of, I'd much rather invest ahead of time for the long game for you and for us. It's going to make our jobs easier if we have to swap out the stove that has like giant gash in it, or paint the one wall that's black. So staging and styling will yield a significantly more money for you than a property that hasn't been staged or styled and addressed in the way that needs to be to present it in the best light. And staging costs nothing to you, for Realty Collective anyway, because we have in-house staging. We have a warehouse of furniture that we just bring in for each property. I can send you guys links to some of the properties that we've done the staging for, so you can see what they look like. And it helps tell a story to the buyer that the buyer can subscribe to, because that's what's really attracting them both online and in person to your property is, I see myself there. I want to live there. You're telling a story of a lifestyle that they want to be part of, and they want that to be their life. We want to show your life in a way where they want your life, make them envious. And that's why design is really a big part of presenting a property. And we want to make sure that we're telling this consistent story from the staging and the styling to the copy and the marketing and the buyers we're trying to reach. And we'll actually look at your listing and then come and see your space, and buyers will come and look at your listing online because of this, and then actually come see it in person because of it. Because if it doesn't look good online, they're not going to come see it in person. If it doesn't look good online, they're probably not even clicking on the listing. So those things need to happen in order to get the buyer to the actual property so they'll make an offer. And buyers are pleasantly surprised that when they do show up, that the photos then match the property that they're showing up, and there isn't this disconnect. And the buyer that is probably going to be buying this property is you, just a couple years or a decade ago. So making sure that you're telling the story of understanding who the buyer is, and then telling a story to reach that buyer and trigger something in them, and so that they are going to move forward on your property. That makes sense. No questions so far, I'm assuming. So next one is considering offers. Oh, I have so many notes on considering offers. Then I get to hand it over to you, Rashidah. So if we've done everything correctly, a well-priced property and marketed property will receive offers within the first 2 weeks, even in a tough market. Considering your offers is really the hardest part of the job for sellers. You want the highest number, obviously, but the highest number isn't always the best offer. Sometimes the first offer comes in and someone offers you the asking price. And as sellers, your initial thought is always, I underpriced it. You did not underprice it. You and your agent did exactly what you need to do, is to attract the right buyer. That first offer is usually the best offer. It will come from an educated buyer working with an agent that's guiding them, who has been in the market a while, has probably missed out on other listings, and understands the importance of acting quickly, and understands the value of your property. It means you have priced correctly. Be prepared to offer concessions, credit, and adjust your price accordingly if you do not get offers, but always counter offer every offer that comes in some way. It's important to have everything in order also for your paperwork so that when you do get interested buyer, you can move quickly and get contracts signed without delay. Because they're going to ask for the due diligence documents and they're not going to sign the contracts until they review everything. And you don't want that to hold up your deal. Time is the biggest killer in these deals. So if you have a great buyer and you wait a week, if they don't sign within the first week, and then they have another weekend or two to go out and look at other open houses, you might lose them to another property that comes on the market. So once we pick a buyer and negotiate the terms, and we send out the deal sheets that outline the terms to the lawyer, while the lawyers are reviewing the deal sheets and those due diligence documents, we will be doing, the buyer will most likely be doing an inspection. And hopefully you've discussed with your real estate agent, me, what issues might come up in the inspection or that are wrong with the property ahead of time so that we can let the buyers know before we even have the inspection what is going to come up. And usually it's showings, like if the AC doesn't work, that's going to be repaired, or that AC doesn't work and the seller is going to give a credit to have it done. They don't have the bandwidth to take care of it right now or the funds to take care of it. You know, addressing these issues ahead of time, being transparent about the issues in the house, people can digest that better rather than finding out from the inspector that something wrong, because then there's a red flag. Oh, why didn't you tell us? You knew that this wasn't working. Why didn't you tell us? What else haven't you told us? So you want to be transparent about the things that are going to be challenges in the deal so that you can not spook your buyer and keep them on the hook for getting to the closing table. So talk with your agent ahead of time if you know any problems coming up and disclose those things. It's all going to come out eventually. Don't assume that the inspector is going to miss something because they're usually pretty good at their jobs. And that's, I read all this. So then we're going to go over to the next slide, which is documents needed. And that's going to be Rashidah.
So now this is where you come back with your attorney again. So you may have spoken with your attorney early in the process. You're just thinking about putting the property on the market. Now you have an accepted offer. You've notified the attorney to expect the deal sheet from your realtor, and the attorney's job now, once they get that deal sheet, is to prepare the draft contract of sale. So if you are selling a house, a couple of things that I had mentioned earlier that you should definitely be sending to your attorney is a copy of your deed, if you have that. If you have a mortgage on the property, a copy of the mortgage. And if you have your owner's policy, which is title insurance policy from when you bought the property, you can send your attorney that. And also, if you have a survey from when you when you purchased the property, which a survey is like the diagram of the property, you can send that to your attorney. So that's if you have a house. If you have a condo or a co-op, for a condo, you can send your attorney your latest common charge statement. And the reason you do that is because in the draft contract, your attorney has to put what the current common charges are. And your property may have been on the market, for a month, and there's been a recent increase in your common charges, so it may not have been updated on the listing. But you always want to, and even if it was updated, you want your attorney to have the latest information. So you want to send your attorney that common charge statement so they can see the exact common charges. Once again, if it's a condo, if you have a copy of your deed, you can send that to the attorney as well, and your owner's policy. If it's a co-op that you're selling, documents that you want to send to your attorney is a copy of your stock certificate. Very important because that has to match how it's going on the contract of sale. Depending on how long you purchased the co-op, there may have been a last name change, or you may have held it with somebody. If the person passed away, they're no longer on the stock. Their name may still be on the stock certificate, but now obviously you're selling and they're no longer there. So you have to prepare for that. So always a copy of the stock certificate. Your attorney can't just look up the stock certificate because it's not a recorded document. So very important that you get that and you have a copy. If you don't have your original stock certificate, and the reason you don't is because you have a loan on the property, you can contact your lender for a copy of it, or you can contact the management company for a copy of your stock certificate. If you don't have a loan on the property and you don't have your stock certificate and lease, you want to notify your attorney as well upfront that you don't have those original documents, because there's going to be some things that your attorney has to prepare and contact the management company to notify them that certain documents are lost. So as soon as that deal sheet and your attorney is preparing the draft contract, it's important that you can get those items over to them. If you don't have anything, all of the items, not a huge issue, but it's always to have that conversation with what items you have and what items you don't. So when that draft contract goes out, the most current information is there. And also before it's finalized and you sign the contract after the buyer signs it, you know that all of the information on the contract is accurate. The worst case is finding out that somebody else is on the stock certificate with you and you didn't notify your attorney, or you lost your stock certificate, and that's going to be an issue. Or if somebody passed away, you need to get the death certificate, or estate issues that comes up. I had a situation where a son owned the property with his mother, and the mother passed away, and he, good thing we looked it up. And then after the conversation, he was like, oh yeah, she passed away a year ago. And I was like, well, your deed doesn't state this specific language. Did you do an estate? Did you probate her estate? And he said, no. And this is at the point when they're about to go into contract, and they have to probate the estate, which now delays the sale of the property for another 6 months as it goes through probate court. If he had reached out to an attorney maybe in the beginning of the process, that would have been discovered and would have, something that wouldn't have delayed the closing as long as it did. But once again, these are documents that you can needed that you should get for your attorney. So set aside that as you start packing, putting things away. Do not shred anything. I say always put it to the side. After you close, you can decide to shred documents, but even then, you probably don't want to shred anything until you do your taxes. If you want to, so that's the documents you're going to be needed once you get into contracts.
Right. And then you want to also just make sure you're talking to your attorney if there's any open permits or violations, any second mortgages or reverse mortgages, just disclosing all that stuff so that those things can be addressed before we go into this process, because they will be issues for lenders and buyers, and you want to make sure that they're not going to hold up your sale and cost you time and money, because keeping the property on the market longer is only going to devalue it. The longer the market, we talked about that first buyer and the 2 weeks, you're going to get your buyer within the first 2 weeks. If we've done everything right, the first 2 weeks, we're going to be in contract, maybe the third. But that if any of these things throw a wrench into your deal, it'll sit on longer. And the longer your property's on the market, the longer it will lose value, because buyers see it sitting, and then it loses the value that it had. So it's a game of timing. And so that's why you want to get ahead of this and work all together to make sure we resolve these issues ahead of time. So I think now that we went over documents, we're going to be in going into contract.
So now that you've given your attorney all of the information, your attorney is going to prepare that draft contract of sale. On the buyer's side, the attorney is doing what they call as due diligence, which is if it's a co-op or a condo, reviewing that offering plan, financials, amendments that your attorney had told you in the way to make sure that you get that to your agent, or your realtor had told you to get that to them, so that once they have that deal sheet, they can send it over to the buyer's attorney to do the due diligence. The buyer is also on the back end, also getting their mortgage. So they're going through the underwriting process. So as a seller, once you're in contract, there's not a lot of paperwork for you to do. Once your attorney gets things like the title report, that's when your attorney may contact you and say, hey, do you have your owner's policy? Because there's an old mortgage that's showing up. Or if it's a co-op and you refinance, there's a open mortgage lien that's still on the property. When you refinance, they didn't record that it was satisfied. So do you have the paperwork from that refinance? So that's why, once again, it's important to keep all of these documentations, because if something comes up during the process, your attorney can go through your documentation and contact the appropriate parties. Contract itself is typically about a 60-day time period to close from when you go into contract for typically a house or a condo. If it's a co-op, it's a longer process. It's typically maybe 90 days or more, depending on how quickly the co-op reviews the packet, how quickly the buyer gets the mortgage. So for your process, once you, as a seller, you want to realize that within that 60, 90-day time period, you are actually going to have to vacate the premises. Your contract has typically major terms such as your closing date, 60 to 90 days, depending on the type of property, that it is as is condition. So the buyer has done their inspection. You have to maintain the property from when you go into contract all the way through the closing. So things such as plumbing, electrical systems still have to be working. The appliances have to be working from when they saw the property. So as you're in contract, make sure you're maintaining the property, nothing's being damaged. For the closing, the contract provides that it's vacant and room clean at the closing. So you want to make sure that Victoria had mentioned that you have an exit plan. What are you planning on doing prior to the closing? Are you moving out of state? Are you renting something? Are you buying another property? If you're buying something, you want to have a conversation with your attorney about what happens when you're buying and selling at the same time period. So provisions can go into your contract of sale. Because closing is when you turn over the keys to 24 to 48 hours prior to the closing. The buyer does a final walkthrough to make sure that you've moved out and there's no one living in the property, nothing has been damaged. So you have to make sure that you do have a place to stay prior to even the closing and you get in the funds. So that's where when you're in contract, the things that you're thinking about. But once again, it's about a 60-day process, 60 to 90-day process from going into contract to closing the deal.
Right. So while you're in contract, do not turn off your heat so your pipes freeze. Make sure all your utilities stay on because we need those on for the final walkthrough, which happens before the closing. And that, we're keeping things moving with the co-op board package and that your agent is on top of the other agent, making sure that the commitment, the appraisal, and the board package is submitted and they're reviewing all the documents so that they are submitted correctly to the management company and they will pass the board if it's a co-op, and that they're prepped for the co-op board interview. So they will pass, because you would hate to come to all the way through this process and then not have the buyers pass the board interview if it's a co-op. So we want to make sure that while we're in contract, all of those things are moving forward. And that is your agent's job to stay on top of the deal and the other agent on the other side, and keeping the buyer in line with the timeline. So then we're going to get out of front and get to the closing table. So before we get to the closing table, we do a final walkthrough. So anything that you've agreed to fix, like the broken stove or refrigerator, needs to be taken care of, or you having to give a credit for that if you weren't able to take care of it. And you need to have, like Rashidah said, everything moved out. So you've had to hire movers and get the things out, or we've had to move all of our staging things out if you moved out ahead of time, as well as having it broom swept and keeping the utilities on for the final walkthrough. So then you will get to the closing the deal, Rashidah.
Yeah. So the attorneys are the ones that are typically coordinating the scheduling of the closing. Closings are done in person. That's when you're signing the deed, you're signing the transfer tax documents. If it's a co-op, you're signing your original stock certificate and lease are brought to the closing so that it can be canceled and a new stock certificate issued to the buyer. So a closing is typically about an hour to 2 hours, sometimes longer depending on the type of transaction. The seller part of signing the documents is typically, I say, you're not signing as much. You're maybe signing for 15 minutes because there's not a lot of documents that you're signing, but the closings are done in person. If you as a seller cannot attend the closing, let's say you moved out of state or there's a conflict and you can't attend, you can give your attorney a power of attorney to sign the documents on your behalf. A conversation that you should have with your attorney because you do need to get that approved by the title company or the management company or the co-op attorney to make sure the specific language is in there. At closing, bank checks are issued, so you're physically getting a check to close from all of your proceeds. All of your expenses are paid from your proceeds. So things like your realtor commission, the New York City, the New York State transfer taxes, flip tax, any co-op or condo fees, all of those are paid from the proceeds at the closing, your attorney fee, and then the balance is given to you at the closing. Your attorney typically will prepare a final closing statement for you, so you know before closing what your net profit's gonna be. So you'll have that information ahead of, and even in the beginning of the process, your attorney should have gone over your estimated closing costs on what your potential closing costs are going to be, so that when they do your final closing costs, because they've got the payoff, they got the flip tax amount, they have the realtor invoices, the title bill and things like that, you know what your final numbers are. But once again, the property has to be delivered vacant and broom clean. The keys are delivered. You get your check, the buyer gets their keys on the closing date. And that walkthrough is done prior. If there's something that does come up prior to closing during a walkthrough, that's something that, as Victoria had mentioned, the attorneys, whether there's a credit, the credit can be given from the proceeds. If there's money that has to be held in escrow agreements can be prepared, but it's important that you do that prior to closing. Escrows are the worst case scenario. I say that should be a last option as a seller. You really want to get your money, give your keys, and not worry about the property afterwards, because escrows, post-possessions, it's always that little bit of your money that's kind of held up, and it turns into a nightmare the majority of the times. So definitely, if there's a situation where you have to remain on the premises or something isn't working, you want to make sure that these things are happening prior to you closing, because your closing should be, here, let me get my check, let me give my keys, wish you the best, and you're finished with your property.
And bye-bye. Except for there, when we didn't talk about it, there are some scenarios when we're talking about where your exit strategy and your timing and our marketing strategy ahead of time, there are some scenarios where sellers need to stay in the property. So they're going to have to rent back from the buyers for a couple weeks afterwards. And knowing that ahead of time is part of how we can curate and tailor to find the right buyer and the pool of buyers for your property that are willing to maybe be an extended contract time. Maybe the 60 days isn't going to be enough for you to make an exit strategy. So we're going to find buyers that are, where we would say to them, hey, we're going to go into contract, you're going to get all your stuff together, but we're going to not be able to close for 6 months because of XYZ. And so knowing that you need that to be secure that you're selling the home, but need a certain length of time, we can curate this experience to reach your goals. We just need to know what they are so that we can facilitate and find the buyer that's willing to agree to that scenario. So, there are outside of the box situations where it's not like you're moving out and you're turning over the keys and you're saying goodbye. But we just need to know what those needs are ahead of time so that we can communicate to buyers, that's what we need from this deal, so that we're going to be able to facilitate for you for those extended circumstances and tailor the process to reach your goals. So I think that we've gone over in less than an hour all of the information that we go with. There's a lot of other moving pieces. This is just an overview to help you digest what the process will be like. There's a lot of other things that happen in the selling process, but we wanted to give people this education so that they have a starting place to understand what the first steps are and what it will be like during the process. But really, there are a lot of other moving pieces. We can't give you my 18 and Rashidah 20 years of knowledge in an hour of every single scenario and hiccup that might come up, but we have given you the gist of it and hope that that was helpful for you. And we're now open for questions if you want to put them in the chat or take yourself off mute, and we can talk about some of the things that you guys are facing as sellers. I could talk about the resources we have. This video will be available. We have our seller's guidebook that you're also going to get. On the YouTube channel, we have some other very specific tips and tricks for sellers that we've curated so that you can digest some more information. And like I said, on our blog, and you can schedule a call with us at any time to just talk. If you're not ready to do it now, you're going to do it in a year or two. If this is business is about relationships, and building that relationship from now moving forward is an important one to establish trust and overcoming these hurdles that you might have with your property. Any questions? No questions.
I think we did a great job and got all the answers out there. So that's a good
I think we did a great job too. I went over a lot of notes because I'm standing in, because Tina usually does this presentation. I usually do the buying class, so we're dividing and conquering. And I just want to thank everybody for their time and hope that you guys thought this was helpful. And we'll be following up after this, and we hope to hear from you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Have a good night.